So in this one, I'm going to be talking about the Palestine protests and the groups involved, who's involved, and how it's funded. I also suggest for people to watch my video entitled Israel and Palestine Dialectics, Biodigitalization. This will help understand each side of the narrative of the conflict further between Israel and Palestine. So now to start this one off, this is the UFT encampment here, and there was tents and food offered to anybody who wanted to join. So, and also we can see some of the signage here. The People's Circle for Palestine is the group at UFT, and so this says "Big Up the Revolution." So, of course, asking for a revolution, or as they say, intifada, which means uprising, is not peaceful. We've also got porta potties in there. The word genocide written on here, and as well you have steel clamps holding this thing together. And as well, you can see this acronym here, BDS, up here. It stands for Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions, which we'll get to. And of course, another sign for Stop Genocide. And then this particular image, which we got a better image right here, is the logo for BDS. And on the fence, I saw this thing here that said socialist.ca. So we'll check that out. The world cries out for change, radical change. The international socialists reject a world of oppression, war, misery, exploitation, and environmental destruction that capitalism has created. We see the potential for a different world based on real democratic control over the major decisions that affect people's everyday lives. The outlines of this better world exist in the present in the struggles against war, neoliberalism, and oppression. As socialists, we are part of these day-to-day struggles, but we also bring a vision of what socialism could be and the steps to achieve this radically different society. The International Socialists are part of a network of revolutionary socialist organizations worldwide. So, of course, revolutionary being one of the words there. So, here we have someone named Deb Cohen, who is the professor at UFT that said if you decide to move against the students, you'll have to go through us first. So, and then also it's mentioned that UFT wanted the encampment gone before June 3rd, which is when the graduation ceremonies would occur, and they go on until I believe June 21st. Court injunction is to use police to clear the encampment since the protesters were given the trespass notice May 24th, and they've been there since May the 2nd when this started. And the Ontario Superior Court is to hold a hearing to end the encampment on June 19th to 20th, as it says here. And as well, I'm going to show a picture of the organizer, at least one of the organizers of the encampment. Her name is Erin Mackey, or Erin McKay, not sure how to pronounce that. So, and then of course, in British Columbia, you have Palestine protesters declaring they run the city as they block a road to a hospital. And of course, these three images, 11, 12, 13, and I guess 14, so 4 images, are the Palestinian protesters blocking the CN rail, and that's in Vancouver. And May 29th, here you actually see in Ottawa, was protest for Kanzik military equipment trade show. They shut that down, and that is a weapons and technology and equipment trade show that goes on once a year in Ottawa. And of course, that same day you have these people here shouting no effing genocide, and there were families and stuff walking by as well. So also, the fact of the matter is I don't see how one can stop a war going on between Israel and Palestine within Canada or even the United States or anywhere else like that. It doesn't really make sense to protest against a war in another country. So moving forward, I'm going to talk a little bit about what went on at the Kansas trade show here, or some of the interesting things in this article. So it says that the protests began early Wednesday when a number of groups gathered at EY Center in the South End to signal their opposition to the Kansas military equipment trade show. The trade show has spurred protests in the past, but Wednesday's turnout was bigger than usual due to the ongoing conflict in Gaza. And the exhibitors and attendees at Kansas are making a fortune off the carnage in Gaza, noted a news release from World Beyond War, which was organizing the protests. Okay, so now we're going to look at World Beyond War. So, says here, was founded January 1st, 2014, and co-founders David Hartsborough and David Swanson set out to make a global movement to abolish the institution of war itself, not just the war of the day. If war is ever to be abolished, then it must be taken off the table as a viable solution. Just as there's no such thing as good or necessary slavery, there's no such thing as good or necessary war. Both institutions are abhorrent and never acceptable, no matter the circumstances. So if we can't use war to resolve international conflicts, what can we do? Finding a way to transition to a global security system that is supported by international law, diplomacy, collaboration, and human rights, and defending those things with nonviolent action rather than the threat of violence is the heart of World Beyond War. Our work includes education that dispels myths like war is natural or we have always had war, and shows people not only that war should be abolished, but also that it actually can be. Our work includes all variety of non-violent activism that moves the world in the direction of ending all war, if you say so. So if they're about peace, are they talking about peace from the standpoint of the United Nations with their sustainable development goals? Interesting thought. So, World Beyond War currently coordinates dozens of chapters and maintains partnerships with nearly 100 affiliates around the world. The organized functions through a decentralized, distributed grassroots organizing model focused on building power at the local level. We don't have a central office, and we all work remotely. We provide tools, training, resources to empower the chapters and affiliates to organize in their own communities, and the work is the holistic opposition to the institution of war at large, not only all current wars and violent conflicts, but the industry of war itself, the ongoing preparations for war that feed the profitability of the system, so on and so forth. So now I'm going to look at David Swanson over here. He is the co-founder, executive director, and a board member of World Beyond War, based in Virginia in the U.S. He's an author, activist, journalist, and radio host, and campaign coordinator for rootsaction.org. And he has a book called War is a Lie, blogs at davidswanson.org and warisacrime.org, and he hosts Talk World Radio, and he's a Nobel Peace Prize nominee. So then we're going to look at David Hartsborough. So this guy here, he is co-founder of World Beyond War, member of the board of World Beyond War, and he's based in California. He's a Quaker and lifelong peace activist and author of his memoir, Waging Peace, Global Adventures of a Lifelong Activist. And he's organized many peace efforts, worked through nonviolent movements in such far-flung locations as the Soviet Union, Nicaragua, Philippines, and Kosovo. And in 1987, he co-founded the Nuremberg Actions, blocking munitions trains carrying munitions to Central America. And in 2002, he co-founded the Nonviolent Peace Force, which has peace teams with over 500 nonviolent peacemakers and peacekeepers working in conflict areas around the world. He's been arrested for non-violent civil disobedience in his work for peace and justice more than 150 times, most recently in the Livermore Nuclear Weapons Lab. And his first arrest was for taking part in the first civil rights sit-ins in Maryland and Virginia in 1960 with other students from Howard University, where they successfully integrated the lunch encounters in Arlington. And he recently returned from Russia as part of a citizens diplomacy delegation, hoping to help bring the U.S. and Russia back from the brink of nuclear war. He's recently returned from a peacemaking trip to Iran and is active in Poor People's Campaign, director of Peace Workers, and he lives in San Francisco, California. So this is interesting considering the fact that they support the Palestine protests, and there's a lot of violent chants and such, which we'll be definitely getting into. And the Palestine protests are really just part of creating civil unrest, as we will explore. So Kathy Kelly has been president of the board of World Beyond War since March 2022, prior to which time she served as a member of the advisory board. And she's based in the U.S., but she's often elsewhere. She's the second board president, taking over for Leah Bolger. And her efforts have led her to living in war zones and prisons over the past 35 years. She was part of two Voices for Creative Nonviolence delegations, which visited Pakistan to learn more about the consequences of U.S. drone attacks. And there were delegations also to visit Afghanistan and learning about casualties of U.S. drone attacks. And she helped organize protests at U.S. military bases operating weaponized drone attacks. And she's the co-coordinator of Ban Killer Drones campaign. So, World Beyond War is a fiscally sponsored project of the Alliance for Global Justice that advocates the abolition of war worldwide. Its advisory board includes Code Pink co-founder Media Benjamin and former U.S. Representative Dennis. And World Beyond War has 32 chapters in 11 countries, along with 99 affiliates. So, looking at some of the funding and such, which is generally listed at the bottom, you can find that one of the donor organizations is the Benjamin Fund, which is ran through Media Benjamin, and also they have received funding from Home Rule globally, the Christopher and Luann Hormel and Fire Monkey Fund of RSF Social Insurance, the Jubitz Family Foundation, Voices for Creative Nonviolence, Vermont Community Foundation, Puffin Foundation, Peace Workers, the Wallace Action Fund, Ben the Ark, the Cove Charitable Fund, James R. and Mary Jane Barrett Foundation, the Tides Foundation, and the War and Peace Foundation for Education. And I also just mentioned the Benjamin Fund. So Tides Foundation is one of George Soros's organizations, and that also includes Open Society Foundations here, which is involved with Alliance for Global Justice. And it's an organizing group that serves as a physical sponsor to numerous left-wing initiatives, such as Refuse Fascism, United Students Against Sweatshops, Stop Mass Incarceration, and the group arose from the Nicaragua Network, an organization which supported the communist-aligned Sandinista regime in Nicaragua, and the group describes itself as anti-capitalist, opposed to the principles of liberal democracy and individual rights, favoring a multipolar world order with powerful rivals to American international primacy. And it's funded by a number of center-left foundations, including George Soros's Open Society Foundations, Tides Foundation, as I just mentioned, Arca Foundation, Surdna Foundation, Public Welfare Foundation, and the Brightwater Fund. And it provides physical sponsorship to groups advocating numerous foreign and domestic far left and extreme left causes, including eliminating the state of Israel, supporting convicted violent leftist extremists, and advancing various labor union efforts. So, physical sponsorship is a legal practice by which a parent organization can handle tax-deductible contributions on behalf of a project in alignment with its mission. So some of the other funders would, include the Benjamin Fund once again, the Fire-Doll Foundation, Ford Foundation, Lynn Handelman Charitable Foundation, also known as Left Tilt. You have Open Society Foundations, like I've already stated, and then something called the Spark Plug Foundation. And like I said, typically it's all at the bottom here. You can see all the organizations and stuff involved. So this is interesting, as Media Benjamin is mentioned as part of Code Pink, and then also the Benjamin Foundation, the Benjamin Fund, excuse me. So what you can see here is Media Benjamin is an advisory board member of World Beyond War, and she's co-founder of the woman-led peace group Code Pink, co-founder of human rights group Global Exchange, and she's been an advocate for social justice for more than 40 years, and described as one of America's most committed and most effective fighters for human rights by New York Newsday, and one of the high-profile leaders of the peace movement by the LA Times, and she was one of the 1,000 exemplary women from 140 countries nominated to receive the Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of millions of women who do essential work of peace worldwide. So she as well she's the author of 10 books mentioned here, including something about drone warfare. And she also has received a Nobel Peace Prize, just like one of the members of World Beyond War. So, interesting to see the Nobel Peace Prize given to people that actually create civil unrest, as we're going to explore further. So, looking at Code Pink, it has come into conflict with the Anti-Defamation League, is what it's saying here. So the Anti-Defamation League and B'nai B'rith, I already talked about in my video entitled Israel and Palestine Dialectics, Biodigitalization. They are in full support of Israel, and so they often come into conflict with Palestinian supporting organizations, although they just keep the ball rolling between both sides, where organizations like ADL or B'nai B'rith call organizations like Code Pink or other Palestinian supporting groups anti-Semitic. And then what happens is the Palestinian groups claim that they're actually anti-Zionist, basically, as a Zionist is someone who believes in the formation of a Jewish country or state. That is not the same thing as being anti-Jewish, and the reason why I'm not using the term anti-Semitic is because a Semite is someone who speaks the languages such as Arabic, Aramaic, and Hebrew, and therefore Jewish is not a language, so that term is greatly inaccurate, and there's a lot of social engineering done on behalf of institutions like ADL and B'nai B'rith that try to prevent people from criticizing Zionism. So, but realistically, between the anti-Semitic card thrown out by organizations like B'nai B'rith or Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs and stuff like that, it's really just about keeping the ball rolling back and forth between organizations like Code Pink or Palestinian supporting organizations like Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions, in order to just keep the civil unrest going. It's no different than red and blue politics. So, Code Pink is a left-wing advocacy group founded in 2002 by Jody Evans and Media Benjamin, and it was created to oppose the 2003 Iraq War, but focuses on social justice by using feminist principles and it's known for its support of Palestinian interests, the communist Castro regime in Cuba, and other anti-American governments and groups. And since 2017, it's also received significant funding from grant-making entities linked to the Chinese Communist Party, and has issued numerous pro-China statements calling on the U.S. government to treat the totalitarian power more favorably. The group has also worked to discredit allegations that the Chinese regime systematically mistreats dissidents and ethnic minority populations, with the way they treat the Uyghur Muslims. In August 2023, the emerging reporting on the group's ties to China prompted inquiries by a U.S. senator. And of course, like I said, it often comes into conflict with organizations such as the Anti-Defamation League, as Code Pink tends to appear to defend Palestinian militant groups such as Hamas. And something that I had also mentioned in my video, Israel and Palestine Dialectics, Biodigitalization, was the fact that Hamas was actually created by Israel through Qatari money, and the country Qatar, the Prime Minister, who also sits on the board of the Council on Foreign Relations, his surname is Al Thani, and the Al Thani family also largely sit on Georgetown University Qatar board, and they as well are the most senior members of Hamas that sit in Qatar. And as well, the Al Thani family created Al Jazeera, the large news outlet. So, all in all, again, it's just about controlling a narrative on both sides, and Israel creating Hamas is no different than the CIA creating Al Qaeda. So, anyway, Code Pink co-founders Jody Evans and Media Benjamin stepped down from their management positions in October 2020, and as well, they support organizations such as Green New Deal that oppose the use of zero-carbon nuclear energy. So they support environmentalist organizations like Greenpeace as well, which is just another George Soros organization. And they support boycott, divestment, sanctions, right, which I was getting at earlier, and I'll be explaining further. And of course, as well, some of their donor organizations would include the Tides Foundation, right, George Soros once again, and then you have something called the Cultures of Resistance Network, and then of course the Benjamin Fund. So the Benjamin Fund is ran through Media Benjamin. It's kind of like she's funding herself to do this. I don't really know how that works, but anyway, the Westchester People's Action Coalition, Westpac, left-of-center nonprofit that supports advocacy movements for social reformation. Founded in 1974, they advocate for progressive social change in Westchester County, New York, and beyond. It's a supporter of Green New Deal, Strike With Us, and boycott, divestment, sanctions. It's endorsed environmentalist anti-fossil fuel policies in the state of New York. And of course, they're another organization that comes into conflict with the Anti-Defamation League, just like Code Pink. And of course, they allegedly promote anti-Semitic language. Of course, that is just a card being thrown out there to keep a ball rolling back and forth when people criticize Zionism, right? Just totally different than criticizing anything having to do with Jewish anything. So following the attack on Israel by militant group Hamas in early October 2023, EDL has attacked Westpac and its funding recipients for their role in organizing pro-Palestinian civil unrest across the U.S., which has appeared to include pro-Hamas messaging. And Westpac has attempted to portray itself as sympathetic to both Palestinian and Israeli losses in the conflict. So then moving forward here, just to talk about some of the funding that Westpac would receive, notably you get National Students for Justice in Palestine, and you have Green New Deal, which it supports as well, and of course, as well, even though I'm not seeing anything directly about George Soros in there, or even the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. We will end up seeing that, of course, throughout this whole thing here. We'll end up seeing it throughout many of the organizations involved, and of course, you have mentioned, sorry, actually, I take that back. You do have the Rockefeller Brothers Fund mentioned, Open Society Foundations, and Tides Foundation. So, now just to look at the executive director of Westpac, you have Nada Kadir and Peace and Justice Action and Educational Network since May 2001, and she's responsible for running the day-to-day operations since 1974. So then you have boycott, divestment, sanctions, which of course is an international campaign to delegitimize the state of Israel as the expression of Jewish people's right to national self-determination by isolating the country economically through consumer boycotts, business, and governmental withdrawal of investment and legal sanctions. Critics allege that the group crosses the line from opposition to Israeli policy or to the administration of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu into open anti-Semitism movement, which claims to have originated in a 2005 call from Palestinian civil society groups, seeks to apply pressure tactics used by activists against the apartheid regime of Cold War era South Africa against Israel. It also echoes the Arab League's failed boycott of Israel, which the organization has claimed to maintain since 1948 amid numerous defections. And in the U.S., BDS focuses its effort on left-of-center university campuses, academic organizations, and cultural figures. The movement has limited support from the mainstream center-left, with the most major known institutional funder being the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. Notable organizations supporting the BDS campaign include Jewish Voice for Peace, National Students for Justice in Palestine, and the American Friends Service Committee, the public policy arm of the Quaker religious movement. And isn't one of the guys in World Beyond War a Quaker? Interesting. So, now to look at the Rockefeller Brothers Fund very briefly. So this is an article about someone named Barbara Marx Hubbard, who is a known transhumanist, who has the organization Foundation for Conscious Evolution. This is also something that the Rockefeller Brothers Fund are involved with. So it says, to midwife the tech-noetic trans-evolution of the universal Christ mind idolized by Fuller and Teilhard de Chardin. Teilhard de Chardin is a Jesuit. Hubbard set up the Foundation for Conscious Evolution, which was seed-funded by Lawrence Rockefeller, the brother of John D. Rockefeller III, David Rockefeller, Nelson Rockefeller, and Winthrop Rockefeller. Lawrence was a president and founding trustee of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, which is a corporate philanthropy that finances social impact investments in biotechnology and digital technology. These, of course, are key building blocks of the Internet of Things, or Internet of Bodies, matrix at the crux of Hubbard's transhumanist dreams of collective conscious evolution. Lawrence also bankrolled esoteric studies into Gnostic Christ consciousness and noetical parapsychology. So, of course, besides the, esoteric aspect here of what they're doing, they're also involved in what is called the Biodigital Convergence, and Israel, through Israel Innovation Center, calls it Bioconvergence. And all countries are involved, but might use different terms to dictate the agenda, but essentially the Biodigital Convergence, as Policy Horizons in Canada would use the term. It basically refers to blurring the lines between what is biological and digital and fusing those things together, amalgamating them. So, all in all, that is where all of this civil unrest leads to, is smart city infrastructure, martial law and also civil unrest and a system where we are competing with each other, where a DNA strand is wired through the blockchain using basically, instead of an NFT, the DNA strand becomes the NFT combined with CRISPR technology, and they want us in a world where we're competing in a token-based economy for tasks where we're allotted tokens, and those tokens allow us to purchase food, water, shelter, and that sort of a thing. So that is the kind of goal that goes on here, and every country and region, both Israel and Palestine, are in on it, as I will demonstrate later on when looking at the standardization organizations. So, Palestinian Youth Movement is an anti-Israel activist group made up of Palestinian youths who believe they are kept from their homeland by Israel. The group's U.S. chapter organizes protests, an annual Capitol Hill gathering in Washington, and backs the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement to delegitimize the state of Israel. And I believe that it is June the 8th in which there is a large gathering of the Palestinian movement in Washington, D.C. So, Palestinian Youth Movement's financials is not public in part because it's a physically sponsored project out of Westpac, which is based out of Westchester, New York, like I said, and supports a variety of anti-Israel initiatives. And, of course, the network is a sponsored project of Westpac, like I was saying. And with this sponsored project of Westpac, it has expressed the view that Israel engages in a quote-unquote racist occupation of Palestinian territories, and that Jerusalem is the capital of an Arab Palestinian state, not Israel, while endorsing the purported right of return of Palestinians to territory in Israel. So then you also have the next organization, which I'll be talking about. So of course, Sparkplug Foundation is one of the donor organizations, and we saw that with one of the others. So we can see a little network, and in a future video, I'll have to be talking about the donor organizations a little bit further beyond the Tides Foundation, Open Society, and Rockefeller Brothers Fund, which I also mentioned Rockefeller Brothers Fund in my video entitled Israel and Palestine Dialectics Biodigitalization. So, U.S. Palestinian Community Network is a network of American Palestinians who work to promote Palestinian independence and consider Israel to be an occupying force in the Arab world. It was created in 2006, and it hosted the 2008 Palestinian Popular Conference and has chapters in 8 states and Washington, D.C. It's a physically sponsored project of Westpac Foundation, and of course the network has received a $10,000 grant from Sparkplug Foundation in 2018 for its youth development initiative, and the Benjamin Fund donated a mere $100 in 2015. So of course we see Media Benjamin's involvement once again. And of course, the co-founder of the U.S. Palestinian Community Network is someone named Hatem Abadea, which I'll be going over here as well. So, he was formerly the group's National Coordinating Committee member in 2018. But the Arab American Action Network is a Chicago-based nonprofit that provides social and other services to the local Arab American community, and it claims that Arab Americans and other minorities have sustained continuous discriminatory attacks since September 11th, 2001. I wouldn't really describe it using this description here that they give, of course. Inside Job would be the most accurate description, actually, but anyway, the AAAN executive director, Hatem Abdea, claimed that Arab Americans have endured 20 years essentially of scapegoating and criminalization and surveillance and attacks against our communities. And of course, it has revenues of just over $647,000 with expenses at close to $552,000 and assets of nearly $729,000. It's received grants from major left-wing foundations, including a donation of $75,000 from the MacArthur Foundation between 2017 and 2018, and $15,000 in 2022 from the Sparkplug Foundation. So once again, going to go over some of those funders in a future video down the road. And of course, looking at Hatem Abdea, he has supported a terrorist, praised terror organizations, called for Israel's destruction, and an activist of the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. In 2018, National Students for Justice in Palestine was a keynote speaker at the conference at the University of California in Los Angeles. And of course, the conference was held in 2018, November 16th to 18th, and it was themed Radical Hope, Resistance in the Face of Adversity. And the conference website stated the reason we can have hope is that quote-unquote Zionism can be destroyed. And since March 2019, his LinkedIn page said he was the director of the AAAN since 1999, and he's a close associate of someone named Razmi O'Day of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and he's the co-founder of the National Coordinating Committee member of the U.S. Palestinian Community Network. And as of March 2019, the LinkedIn page of his said the National Coordinating Committee is a leadership body for USPCN. And he also graduated from the University of California, Los Angeles in 1994. So, Razmi O'Day, what happened was Abdea here was reportedly the coordinator for Razmi and for the defense committee before she was deported for immigration fraud later that year. And O'Day was a key military operative with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, or terrorist organization. And in 1969, she masterminded a supermarket bombing that killed 2 college students and attempted to bomb the British consulate in Jerusalem, and later moved to the U.S. but was deported to Jordan in 2017 for immigration fraud. And September 19th, 2017, rally was held in support of Razmi O'Day. Abdea said in a YouTube video published by the Chicago Sun-Times that he was there to honor Razmi for her 5 decades of organizing. He also reportedly said at the rally, "We will liberate Palestine. We will liberate Palestine because of the Razmi O'Days of the world." And at keynote speech in 2018, Abdea claimed during his speech that pro-Israel organizations, quote, go after students like you, just like they went after my friend and colleague Razmi O'Day. And Abdea praised SJP and Students for Democratic Society students who organized events in support of O'Day as she was fighting to stay in the U.S. So that's how that goes. Linked into somebody who is involved in a Jerusalem bombing that killed 2 college students. So, some hero. Anyway, the Action Network is an online tool for left-of-center outlets to organize, fundraise, and circulate petitions for liberal causes. The Action Network was used to organize left-of-center demonstration, Women's March, environmentalist protests against Keystone XL pipeline, and the March for Our Lives event supporting gun control. The online platform can be used by any left-of-center organizations that features a free unpaid version of its services. the Action Network emerged during the Occupy Wall Street protests in 2011, and in 2014, the Action Network, a division of Action Squared, was used to assemble the People's Climate March in New York. The network was used to assemble a crowd to protest international inaction on climate change at the United Nations. And the Action Network hailed as the backbone for the march, which was also used to coordinate the Women's March in 2017. The Action Network assembled names, emails, and other data for the platform to organize constituents for further protests or actions and manage the march's email list. So the president is Mark Fleischman here, or Fleischman, not sure how to pronounce that there. But so this founder and president of the Action Network, he has experience in areas like occupational health, labor, and corporate governance. And he is the lead director of the Amalgamated Bank and a trustee of a major pension fund, which put him in a unique position to run numerous comprehensive campaigns involving corporate research, shareholder actions, grassroots organizing, consumer boycotts, complex litigation strategies, and corporate governance. Right. So if you're factoring corporate governance, having access to being a trustee of a major pension fund, and also his career experience with corporate governance, none of this really spells grassroots at all, especially when people like George Soros and the Rockefeller Brothers Fund largely back this entire network of Palestinian supporting organizations and also climate change supporting organizations. This is just his resume here I'm going to go over as I talk. So climate change in and of itself is just really an excuse for what they call twinning, which essentially you'll have different, we'll call it, I guess, biochar, if you will, which is stuff that goes into the soil, and these nanosensors, which are used for twinning the environment to create that metaverse environment. And smart technology is really the gateway for a smart city environment. The smart city environment is a gateway for the metaverse type of environment, and those nanosensors are required to make that happen. So climate change is just an excuse to apply twinning technology is really all it is. And the Action Network, you can see different organizations that they support, such as this union organization, and then of course Black Lives Matter. So I'm just going to go over Action Squared very briefly, and then I'll go over that union, the AFL-CIO. But Action Squared is a for-profit company that builds online tools for left-of-center, left-wing nonprofits and labor unions, primarily through the Action Network and Action Builder. And so Action Network is an online tool set and the sole owner of Action Squared. Action Builder is another online development tool, is owned by Action Squared, and was created in cooperation with the AFL-CIO. And of course you have the co-founders here, Brian Young and Leslie Tulf. So, of course, it shares an office with Change to Win, a federation of labor unions, and is closely associated with Service Employees International Union and International Brotherhood of Teamsters. And the leadership of Action Squared has been described as having deep ties to the labor movement, which of course goes as no surprise. So to lead into talking about Leslie Tulf, and then I'll talk about Brian Young. So says here, the COO of Action Network, a digital mobilization organization that Fast Company calls the technological backbone of the anti-Trump resistance. And whether you're for Biden or Trump, red or blue, it really doesn't matter, because in politics, conservatives and liberals are Democrats and Republicans. are just two wings of the same bird. So she's wrote a critically acclaimed graphic novel. She was CEO and president of Union Plus, which dealt with credit card, mortgage, insurance, car protection, discount, and telecommunications, which is one of the keys in the biodigital convergence. And she's also launching a 529 grant program and a college loan rebate grant. And of course, she graduated from the University of Michigan, but earned her MBA in marketing and finance in Columbia University, and she's worked in senior management positions at both Citicorp and American Express before her position at Union Plus. So this, of course, here is her resume, and people, of course, can look at these links as they will be found in the description. But of course, sometimes with LinkedIn, what you have to do is you just have to type the person's name and LinkedIn on Google and click on the Google link in order to get there, because sometimes those links don't work if people are curious. So Brian Young here, of course, organizer, technologist for social change, public speaker, and nonprofit executive, founder of the Action Network, of course, tool set that fast company called the backbone of the anti-Trump opposition, and keynote speaker at panel leader at events in US, Canada, Australia, and the European Union, board member at Netroots Nation, digital campaign leader for over 15 years, including work campaigns and major Democratic independent expenditure organizations. So now I'm going to move on to talk about the American Federation of Labor Congress of Industrial Organizations. So, largest federation of labor unions in the U.S. It was formed in 1955 as a merger between the American Federation of Labor and the Congress of Industrial Organizations, and it boasts membership of over 9 million voting members and 3 million associate members. It retains a large member base. The proportion of the workforce that is organized by labor unions has declined substantially since the 1960s. And of course, as well, we can see that there will be some very deep ties actually to the National Endowment for Democracy, as the president of the AFL-CIO is Liz Schuler, and she is a member of the National Endowment for Democracy. So this was a think tank set up in the 1980s under the Reagan administration, and it's used as a wing for the CIA, where essentially this organization will take the blame over that of the CIA for chaos ensued throughout the world, essentially. So that is what the National Endowment for Democracy is, pretty much just a wing of the CIA. So she is president of the AFL-CIO, Liz Schuler, and she believes in the labor movement, and she's committed to busting myths about labor, leveraging the labor movement's diversity for innovative approaches to social justice, making the benefits of union voice on the job available to working people everywhere. And she's the first woman to hold the office of president in the history of the Labor Federation. And she was elected by the Executive Council of AFL-CIO on August 20th, 2021, after her predecessor, Richard Trumka, passed away. And in 2009, she was the first woman elected to the position of Secretary-Treasurer at the AFL-CIO convention, and the youngest woman ever on the Federation's Executive Council. And as Executive Treasurer, she served as the Chief Financial Officer, turning deficits into surpluses and steering the Federation through multiple fiscal crises, including this particular thing that I'm not going to say the words of because I want to keep this video on YouTube. And in addition to her stewardship of Federation's finances, she led the AFL-CIO's initiatives on the future of work, retirement security, clean energy economy, public safety reform, workforce development, and empowering women and young leaders. So I'm going to talk about another link to the National Endowment for Democracy. So Margaret de Reyes is the director for the Institute uh, Institute for Middle East Understanding, and of course, it's basically it says she's a former advocacy coordinator of the Bay Area Immigrant Rights Coalition, and she's former senior program officer at the National Democratic Institution for International Affairs. So that is one of the four wings of the National Endowment for Democracy. I also do have a video where I covered that particular think tank, so I'll leave that in the description as well for people to watch if they're curious. It's a much older video, one of the first ones I did actually. And so basically this Institute for Middle East Understanding is essentially a pro-Palestinian foreign policy advocacy organization that works to highlight alleged human rights violations perpetrated upon Palestinians by the Israeli government. So yeah, this one is definitely interesting here to see that link once again to the National Endowment for Democracy. So now I'm going to read about something called the Niagara Palestine Coalition. It says here that it was founded in the wake of the October crisis in Palestine in 2023 and has members from diverse backgrounds including Palestinians, Jews, indigenous peoples from various nations across Turtle Island, academics, union activists, students, youth, and retirees across the Niagara region of Ontario. It has organized weekly demonstrations in Niagara on Sundays, as well as fundraisers, educational events, and initiatives that aim to include perspectives from Indigenous communities within its advocacy work for Palestinian rights, whatever you say. So, this particular website here, it says the indigenous peoples of Palestine are the Jahalin, Al-Kabne, Al-Azme, and Al-Ramadin, and Al-Rashidai Bedouins. I apologize for the pronunciation. It says Israel abstained from voting for the UN Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and the indigenous peoples living in Palestine are still living with demolitions and confiscations of their property, as well as restricted rights to movement. So, the idea that Israel did not vote in favor of UNDRIP and Palestine did is just to create those dialectics, if you will. So, UNDRIP, as I'll be referring to it as, essentially grants land and resource rights to quote-unquote indigenous people, but does not define what indigenous means in that act. So, therefore, what I'm saying is that is open to interpretation and can be skewed on a whim. And as well, with the UN's involvement, nothing is really good in that regard. And I think Israel holds full membership at the United Nations, but Palestine holds a different type of membership spot where they essentially are like, they don't have a full membership status, so they can't actually vote on issues, but what they can do is they still have a voice in the United Nations, and of course they are supporting UNDRIP. So it's just really a matter of dialectics there. There's no sense of favoritism between Israel and Palestine from the perspective of the United Nations. So I also just want to add in just a little bit about the UFT encampment, and then I'll move forward. So on May 11th, there was a native fire within the UFT encampment, and on May 18th in Toronto, there was about 600 Palestinians and supporters, and there was approximately 10 native people that were present. And on May 25th, when I attended the next week, I didn't see any natives. There were 0. And on May 26th in Niagara Falls, another one that I attended through the Niagara Palestine Coalition, there were also 0 natives there. So there were 0 natives supporting the rally. So the point that I'm getting at here is I don't really understand why these Palestine groups are using terms like Turtle Island and stuff like that. To me, it's all just very questionable to say the least, right? So, in particular, this is someone I ran into named Gabriel, and when I ran into him in Niagara Falls and I asked for his name, he didn't even tell me his name. And if you're a public figure that's speaking to, in this case, Niagara Region City Council, why would you refuse to give up your name if you're a public figure? That's just honestly shady as far as I'm concerned. So, I'm going to go over some of the images here. So, of course, you had Union Station that was occupied as well by the Palestinians in their protest. And then this was on May 26th. It ends up saying this is a child-friendly event, yet this is the title right here. So that brings into question the nature of if this is really family-friendly or not. So, of course, here in this image here, you could see three different people. This guy is Jason. He told me his name. That's Gabriel, and by the way, I found out his name the day after he refused to tell me. So, just throwing that one out there. And then, of course, this guy here, I never caught his name, but he was basically echoing the chants that were done primarily by Jason. And he had a megaphone and he was getting in people's face, and you can really you can cause hearing damage by doing that and permanent hearing loss. So this is quite clearly a sign of aggression. When you aim a megaphone, you have to aim it upward as you speak and be at an appropriate distance from people when you use one. So here's, of course, the main speaker, Jason, and then this other guy who spoke named Muhammad. This is just a better image of him. That's why I took this screenshot from a different post. But he essentially, like, these people, the Niagara Palestine Coalition, used a little girl to do a speech, and she was reading something quite clearly, which were not her words. So she wasn't expressing herself, actually. She was just saying something that was written for her to speak. And as far as I'm concerned, you're just literally using a child as a prop for your cause. So make of that what you will. And these are some of the chants which they stated. So they were saying from Turtle Island to Palestine, occupation is a crime. They also mentioned other things like the Congo and Sudan and Haiti as well. And they mentioned 40,000 people. It says these three words, and then it says that about children as well, these three words. And of course, they're also chanting things like intifada, which is a word that means uprising, right? And then of course, as well, you have here in this temporary document here, you have other chants like Israel, Israel, what do you say? How many have you killed today? I'm just not saying certain words because I want to keep this video on YouTube. And of course, they mention other nations like USA and Canada. And of course, Justin Trudeau, you can hide, we charge you with genocide. And they do the same thing with Pierre Poilievre, and then with Mark Miller, the immigration minister, and other people as well. So, and then of course with this chant, I meant to write 40,000, but they started chanting it more slowly in an emphasized manner. So if this is supposedly a child-friendly or family-friendly event, why are you announcing these things? And I understand bringing attention towards something going on, but there's a way to go about things, and then there's a way to go about things in terms of just trying to deliver shock value. And also, I'd say, go as far as to say creating civil unrest. Because Gabriel, pretty much, I'm going to go over how he tries to set up a shield of criticism for the Palestinian community is what I'm going to do. So in this, on March 23rd, he speaks to the Niagara Region City Council, and he says that the council sees him as a quote-unquote dangerous and rogue element, and uses the words of Israeli Defense Minister, a human animal. He's saying that the Niagara Region City Council see him as that. And he says, I'm sure this government sees a lot of similarities with itself and the government of the Zionist regime, so he's referring to Israel. And he's just basically complaining about how they're showing the colors of the Israeli flag, but not the Palestinian flag. And he's trying to basically make city council pick a side, and he accuses them of choosing a side. And of course, as well, in this other delivery of Gabriel's, he ends up saying that he is a resident of St. Catherine's, and as well, he was delegating, so this is to the Niagara Region Diversion and Inclusion Committee, and he also seems quite happy to be there, which is interesting. And he says he's a Palestinian living in Niagara that's been deeply affected by anti-Palestinian racism in this region and beyond, and then goes on to give it an acronym like APR so that this idea just cements in people's minds. And he describes it as a form of anti-Arab racism that targets Palestinian narratives, silencing or excluding them, while also erasing their history. And he says it manifests itself through historical revisionism and attempts to delegitimize the legitimate struggle for freedom, justice, and self-determination by the Palestinian people, including our right of resistance against an oppressive occupying power, and says that an example is painting all forms of Palestinian resistance, such as art or music, as terrorism. And he says the state of Israel has launched a genocidal campaign against the Palestinians. And he says that Canada has adopted a definition of anti-Semitism that people argue conflates the definition of anti-Semitism and criticisms of Zionist policy and ideology that quote-unquote silence voices like mine to seek to shed light on the ongoing genocide in Palestine. Palestinians and their allies are being defamed with slander, saying they're anti-Semitic, a terrorist threat, or sympathize or oppose democratic values, which is a more blatant form of APR. He also describes Palestine as a quote-unquote indigenous peoples, and he says it's distinct from Islamophobia because it erases Palestinians of other faiths, such as Christians. So there's quite a bit to unpack there. So of course, like I mentioned about people that support Palestinian causes that are accused of anti-Semitism, this is just a way for Zionist organizations to toss a ball back and forth where they call the Palestinians anti-Semitic, and then the Palestinians go to basically state that basically the Palestinians then go on to say that they are not able to criticize Zionist policy and ideology and that kind of a thing. So I'm all for criticizing Zionism, actually, but the fact of the matter is that when you make terms like anti-Palestinian racism and you say that it manifests itself through things like historical revisionism, basically all this does is stop people from criticizing this cause or many of the causes. And he says the right of resistance against an oppressive occupying power is just justifying the actions that these people are taking, and then also accusing people of basically his remarks of saying that Palestinian resistance in the form of art or music is labeled as terrorism. Well, when you see people that use red paint and make themselves look like, they're all dead, right? Like in the case of the protest for Kanzik, this is shock value for people, and it's also desensitizing as well. So that's actually a legitimate criticism, and you're trying to stop people from criticizing your actions, and you're also trying to get people, you're basically trying to shield yourself from criticism, when also this is exactly what the Zionist organizations do as well, by labeling people anti-Semitic that try and criticize their causes. Basically what happens is Gabriel will just label people as anti-Palestinian racists for criticizing this cause in particular, when the reality is that the narrative is controlled on both sides, and both sides, the Palestinians and the Israeli side, are both just as much responsible for wanting to build smart infrastructure, for instance, and as well both partake in the blockchain equally, which is the backbone for this smart infrastructure, if you will, and the platform for all of it, essentially. So, as well, using terms like indigenous, you're also giving things like UNDRIP, you're giving things like UNDRIP credibility, when the reality of it is that that is just a land grab, is all it is, and it's also a resource grab in and of itself. So, and it doesn't even clearly define what indigenous means. And also, Gabriel, if you are living in Canada, sorry, just before I get to this, I want to say, criticizing the advocating of a revolution, which is exactly what you're doing, or any grotesque chants of death and despair, attempts to quote-unquote delegitimize the legitimate struggle for freedom, is what Gabriel would say. But that couldn't be further from the truth, because there is no peace to come from a revolution when revolution comes from revolve, which is a circular motion. All you need to do is look at France, Greece, or Spain and their civil wars as an example. So, Gabriel, if you're living in Canada, you should be educating yourself on the native treaties and educating yourself on the J tree, such as the J Treaty, one dish, one spoon, and also the two-row wampum is what you should be doing if you're living here. And as well, you should really actually be preaching for peace and be open to criticism without putting up a shield with terms such as anti-Palestinian racism or whatever. And also, you should be willing to give up your name if you're a public figure as well, just like I am. I'm Matt Unseated, and you can find me on Facebook if you want to actually ask me questions directly. And also, you can find me on YouTube at Matt the Unseated, and links will always be in the description. And you can feel free to comment, like, and subscribe, and share if you want to. So, anyway, this is the Palestinian Standardization Organization. It's called the Palestine Standards Institution. And all of these standardization organizations are what standardize and regulate different technologies and sciences and applications behind the biodigital convergence. So, it was established in 1996, and as well, the mission is to facilitate trade and investment in Palestine by meeting the metrology, standards testing, and quality-related needs of the business community while ensuring consumer and environmental safety. It is a member of the Arab Regional Standards Body and became a member of the ISO in 2001 and correspondent member in 2004. A number of MOUs have been signed with similar national standards bodies in the region. It's governed by a board of directors from the public and private sectors, in addition to its headquarters in the city of Ramla. The PSI has 3 more branches in the cities of Gaza, Nablus, and Hebron. So, just want to look at some of the technical committees here. So, these technical committees are just different collaboration between other standardization organizations and other standardization groups that work on different technologies, applications, and sciences. So blockchain and distributed ledger technologies, and as well information security, cybersecurity, and privacy protection. These particular committees, you will actually see that the Israel Standardization Organization also sits on those boards, which I will be getting into. So this is AIDSMO, the Arab Industrial Development Standardization and Mining Organization. It was a result of the Arab Organization for Mineral Resources and Arab Organization for Standardization and Metrology, and the Arab Industrial Development Organization as the main organization, and it operates under the umbrella of the League of Arab States with its own legal entity and administrative and financial autonomy. Its aims are to contribute to the development of the industrial sector and achieve industrial coordination and integration in Arab countries, encourage Arab industries based on creativity, innovation, knowledge, and technology to promote their competitiveness, upgrade quality infrastructure in the Arab countries, and facilitate their inter-Arab trade, contributed to the development of the mining sector in the Arab countries. And of course, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are the mandates that governments follow, and also the what the standardization organizations follow. So the League of Arab States, March 22nd, 1945, Cairo, Egypt, at the Arab General Congress, on signature by representatives of the then 7 Arab states of the Pact of the League of Arab States, also referred to as the Charter, which is a constituent instrument of the League. Establishment followed meetings from September 25th, 1944 to October 7th, 1944, Alexandria, later known as the Arab Unity Consultations, at which the Arab League project, subsequently known as the Alexandria Protocol, had been signed. Two further documents may be regarded as complementing the Charter: Treaty for Joint Defense and Economic Cooperation, signed March 13th, 1950. The Charter for National Economic Action, issued November 26, 1980. And the Charter also proposed to set up Arab Court of Justice, and the AIILAS member states have become parties to both instruments, and the League of Arab States headquarters transferred temporarily from Cairo to Tunisia in March 1979, but returned to Cairo following a resolution dated September 10th, 1990, and of course they are on board the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as well, like I was saying. So this is the AIDSMO website, and you can essentially see, so one thing, the website is in Arabic, but these are the partnering organizations. You have like the Arab Monetary Fund, the International Standardization Organization, the International Electrotechnical Commission, different United Nations departments, and as well the Islamic Development Bank, Saudi Mining Services, and different financial institutions and such within the Arab world. So, about us, for the PSI, it was established in 1994 according to a presidential decree by President Yasser Arafat. However, started operations in 97, and it works according to the law on standards and metrology number 6 out of 2000, and it has autonomous status and is considered the sole body responsible for issuing Palestinian standards and recognized by both locally and internationally as the focal point for Palestinian participation in the global system of harmonized standards. So, under the board of directors, you see this Mr. Khaled Al-Osaili. He's the chairman of the board of directors, and a little brief description about him. He was born in Hebron in 1947, was the Minister of National Economy in the Palestinian Authority government of Mohammed Shtayyeh, formed in April 2019, and he is a Palestinian businessman and helped establish the Palestine Telecommunications Company in 1996, and the Arab Palestinian Investment Company in 1994, and he's been a member of the Palestinian National Council since 1995. So now to look at the Standards Institution of Israel, and it's the standardization body of Israel and has been the national leader on quality since its establishment in 1923. The institution is a public, non-profit statutory organization empowered by the Standards Law, 1953, and publicly governed by representatives of organizations playing a major part in the national economy. And is a founding member of the International Standardization Organization and has always been an active member representing Israel in all international and regional standardization work. Operates in three main areas: standardization, testing, and certification, and enhances research and development activities in those areas. So, and to move forward here, just going to read a little bit about it on Wikipedia. So, it was established in 1945 by the Society of Engineers and Architects, and it was registered as a company and independently set its standards, conducting quality testing and conducting surveys and studies. It was an outgrowth of Materials Testing Laboratory established in 1923 to check the quality of building materials, and only 30 years after launching the laboratory in 1953, the institution was legally acknowledged as the supreme authority for setting Israeli standards in keeping with the Law of Standards in 1953, and the offices of the Standards Institution are located in the Ramat Aviv district of Tel Aviv near Tel Aviv University. So there is a large list of technical committees that the Israeli Standardization Institution sits on, such as biometrics, cloud computing, IT service management, AI. There's also nanotechnology and all kinds of different things that revolve around the biodigital convergence. But of course, you have blockchain and distributed ledger technologies, which is ISO Technical Committee 307, which of course the Palestine Committee sits on as well. And then, of course, you also have the Information Security, Cybersecurity, and Privacy Protection Committee as well that they sit on. So basically that's a combination between Israel and Palestine once again. So both of them deal in cybersecurity, and both of them also deal in the blockchain and sit on the same board doing that. And of course, the Standards Institution of Israel is part of the international quality community and an active member of the international standards and certification organizations, including the International Electrotechnical Commission and the International Organization for Standardization Organization. And they see that the Standards Institution of Israel has recognition agreements that facilitate foreign trade. So with this standardization organization here, it's interesting because this particular committee, the cybersecurity one, you can see the committee manager is Mr. Subi Ahmed, and the DIN is the German Standardization Institution. And then, of course, the Blockchain Institution, you have the committee manager, Amy Howie, which is part of Standards Australia. So, to show Subi Ahmed, right, what happens here is Subi Ahmed of the German Standardization Organization, he has an extensive resume where, of course, I already mentioned that particular joint committee. And then he's a test engineer. He was a test engineer at Better Guards Technology, and he also performed data analysis at this particular institute for biomechanics and musculoskeletal regeneration. And he was a mathematics tutor. He had an internship in medical engineering as well. And he can speak German, Arabic, and English. And of course, we can see here, he is, of course, all, into the Palestine movement in and of itself, which is interesting because he literally sits on the same board as the Israeli Standards Institution. So there's like a nice double standard right there. And then, of course, this is the guy who runs the Israel Standards Institution, of course, Gilad Golub. And he is a lecturer of advanced studies at this particular university. And, of course, the CEO of the Standards Institution of Israel. And he's worked for something called the Environmental Services Company. And he was the CEO and chief chemist of the Environmental Services Company. And he was the head of the R&D department of Dead Sea Magnesium. And, of course, deputy manager for department for youth science education at a university. So, and then, like I already mentioned, Standards Australia, so sitting on the blockchain technical committee, they're the ones that are running it. So, of course, you have Amy Howie, who is the project manager for it. And basically it says here that her experience in previous roles at the ISO include, her other experience includes Fundraising Institute Australia, Australian Sailing and Yachting Australia, and holds a diploma at the Australian Institute of Management. And her skill set includes event management, sports and sports management, marketing, communications management, and more. So realistically, so to conclude all of this, right, not only do Israel and Palestine sit on some of the same standards boards, or standards technical committees, and they also work toward the same agenda, the Biodigital Convergence, but they also just repeatedly throw verbal stones at each other that could be passed back and forth, such as Israeli supporting institutions that basically throw out the card of saying that the Palestinian supporting organizations are anti-Semitic, and then the Palestinian supporting organizations saying that they're not terrorists and that basically they're accusing others of anti-Palestinian racism and don't allow others to talk about their history, really. They try to safeguard that. And so both sides are just as much responsible for censorship in and of itself. And also, really, the boiling point between this whole Israel and Palestine conflict, if you will, which all nations seem to have different institutions that support either side of it at face value. The whole point is to cause civil unrest, and this is exactly what the Palestine supporting protesters are doing, and what these encampments really are leading up toward. If you think about it, it all goes in a problem, reaction, solution type of scenario where a problem occurs and then people react, and then the artificial solution is put in place, which would be martial law. And then a step further than martial law would be the biodigitalization agenda, and promoting those smart cities and creating that metaverse environment, which once again both Israel and Palestine are just as much on board of. And Hamas was a creation of Israel in order to further destabilize not only the Palestine region, but also basically create a sense of destabilization as well within Israel. And they also use Hamas as an excuse to bomb Palestinian territory. So it really just works both sides, and Hamas is a creation of Israel through Qatar money and through the Al Thani family, which the most senior members of Hamas are part of the Al Thani family. So what people should really be doing is educating themselves on the native treaties, and they should also be looking at something called findaspring.org, which will show natural springs for water, and we can work on protecting the water supply. And also, I just want to say on the last note that it is nonsensical to be protesting about a war that is going on overseas from another country entirely, right? It's one thing to be within that region, and then it's another to be in Canada or the United States protesting about it. It's just nonsensical and leading toward civil unrest. And I'm all for freedom of speech and people expressing themselves. However, creating shields where people cannot criticize your cause, such as being accused of anti-Semitism on behalf of the Zionists and being accused of anti-Palestinian racism or historical revisionism, is on the Palestinian side. Both are just as corrupt, and both just bounce the ball back and forth, just like red and blue politics. So anyway, I've said enough. So thanks everyone for watching, and take care of yourselves.